The Canadians board ships, learn the objective, get maps of Dieppe. The raid is set for July 4th, then postponed 24 hours due to bad weather. It's postponed a second time, a third time, a fourth time. Late on July 7th, the gale still blowing, the raid is cancelled. The Canadians are deeply disappointed.
Well, I was delighted, absolutely delighted. I've never been happy about this very difficult operation being done by such inexperienced commanders and troops. I was absolutely delighted. You see, bravery alone is no substitute for battle experience, none. So I seized my pen and I wrote a letter to the Commander-in-Chief, Home Forces, General Paget. And I said in that letter, I recommended that this operation must never again be contemplated. Never. I've not got a copy of that letter, but I suppose somebody has. It must exist somewhere, because that letter has been quoted in all official histories. It was even quoted by Sir Winston Churchill in one of his books. I can't remember what I said. I wish I had it. Anyhow, that's what I said. The advice was disregarded. On the 27th of July, it was decided to remount the operation. Well, I think what was worse was that it was now put entirely under Canadian command. And the top generals in the army chain of command were General MacNaughton, General CRERAR, and General Robertson, all of whom lacked any experience of modern battle.
For the record, Field Marshal Montgomery says in his memoirs that once the Dieppe force was unsealed and dispersed, I considered the operation was cancelled. When he heard of the decision to remount the raid, he says, I was very upset. I considered that it would no longer be possible to maintain secrecy. Accordingly, I wrote to General Paget, telling him of my anxiety and recommending that the raid on Dieppe should be cancelled for all time. If it was considered desirable to raid the continent, then the objective should not be Dieppe. The Field Marshal's concern here is that the remounting made secrecy impossible. No mention in these memoirs that the Canadians' inexperience might have proved disastrous.
When the raid was called off in early July after the series of bad weather,
yeah,
was it, as you remember, a cancellation? Did you think that Dieppe was off?
It was canceled.
No doubt of this.
No, no.
Wasn't a postponement?
No, not that time. But there had been a meeting in Washington around that time, and there had been great pressure brought to bear on the British particularly to some diversion to take the pressure off the Russians. And the pressure was not only from the Russian side, from Stalin, but also from the American side. So when Mountbatten and Churchill and the rest got back, it was decided to try and relaunch the Dieppe large-scale raid.
This was done in conditions of quite unusual secrecy. For instance, at the meeting of the Chiefs of Staff, for the first time, nothing whatever was recorded in writing. And even the First Lord of the Admiralty, Mr. Alexander, wasn't let into the plot. We assumed that although the Germans might be aware that an operation had been planned and abandoned, that the last thing they would ever expect, even if they had known what the objective of the previous raid was supposed to be, and we now know they had no such idea, was that we would, in fact, remount it.
I was horrified to hear the thing was on. I knew nothing about it until the day before, and was not allowed, although I asked to go on it. They wouldn't let me go. Of course, my mind was very confused at that time. I was horrified by the whole thing. I didn't know why it had been mounted or anything about it. And I'm talking now in retrospect, with hindsight. I can see now that there were good reasons for the remounting this operation.
I was called in by the General and the AAQMG about the 18th of July.
This is General Roberts?
General Roberts, yes.
Colonel Eric Bell of Winnipeg, at that time a major and a supply officer. His assignment was staggering: to re-equip the raiding force on short notice and in complete secrecy. Could it be done, the general asked.
Supply and re-equip the forces that were going to take part. My answer was that given 10 to 12 days, I could, and smooth sailing, I could supply the force. But to keep it secure, we were supplied by the British. And after I had been informed that the operation was going into effect, I was then told that the British Combined Ops had created a store depot at
Oh, this is Warnford Park.
Warnford Park at West Meehan. And we would have direct liaison with War Office, and War Office would see that we would get the supplies out of British depots and not touch Canadian depots at all.
We were told that there was a Canadian officer who had in London been saying that he thought there was going to be a raid on Dieppe. So I went off to see him.
Granwy Rees recounts one of Dieppe's curious little side stories.
We interviewed him, and he said, well, he'd been left at home behind at rear headquarters when the division went. He had the intelligence to realize that they must have some important task. He deduced that they were going to carry out a raid on the enemy coast. He got out all the maps he could. He measured all the range of fighter cover. He looked at the beaches. He took all the relevant factors into account and decided there was going to be a raid on Dieppe without actually believing it, himself, but he thought this was the most logical conclusion to come to.
And said so.
And said so. Of course, there was no reason why he shouldn't. It was simply an inspired guess. Mm. So we had, unfortunately, to go off and put him under detention, just to remove him without any blame being attached to him. We had just to put him away until the raid was over.
Now, examination of German sources after the war has confirmed our view, namely that the Germans had absolutely no idea whatever that a raid on Dieppe was about to take place. An encounter which took place at sea between the landing craft flotilla carrying the commandos to attack the eastern guns and a small German coastal convoy was entirely fortuitous. In fact, if they'd been expecting a raid, there'd be no convoy running at all. They could have had no idea whatever that a raid was planned on Dieppe that night, because they gave unusually late leave to their fighter pilots who were stationed in the vicinity of Dieppe, and so made them very late in reacting to the air battle.
Of course, the first, and to my mind the acid test of surprise, lay in the fact that we completed the passage across the channel, which included quite a complicated operation of sweeping channels through a minefield, sure, without any attack from German E-boats at all. And I'm quite sure that if they'd been expecting an attack on this objective, the force would have been attacked. Because after all, the assault ships are sitting targets when they stop to lower their boats, and their loss would have had a serious effect, not merely on that operation, but on the subsequent conduct of the war. But that didn't happen. Then again, the Germans never switched off their various lighthouses. And they proved an invaluable guide in checking our position in the final approach, which one I'm sure would not have been done if they'd been expecting a raid.
On the other hand, my own observation, I saw very little movement of any German troops from the time we were in sight of land until the end of the operation. In other words, they were all in their positions, and they all had sufficient ammunition for the day's work and sufficient food and water. We saw no movement of German troops at all.
Nein, wir erwarteten den Angriff nicht. Wir hatten keine Ahnung, dass kommen würde. Aber die Überraschung für die Kanadier ging trotzdem verloren.
No, we did not expect the attack. We had no idea of it, but the element of surprise upon which the Canadians counted was lacking in spite of it, for we had sounded a nightly alarm. Throughout the months of suspense, the German command had ordered that each week drill alarms had to be carried out. So in the evening before the attack, I had sounded the alarm in my sector at Puys. All units stationed at Puys were in their place. There were a rifle platoon, a heavy machine gun squad, a German Air Force signal company. All were in position. Their drill alarm lasted till about 3 a.m. After that, I went back to my command post at Dieppe East, and since you could hear a more spectacular shooting going on at sea, I thought I had better order a drill alarm there too. By this alarm, the base Puys was again involved. Thus, at 5 a.m., when the landing of the Allied forces was in progress, my whole battalion and the units attached, that is to say, the artillery, the anti-aircraft batteries, and some naval detachments, all were in position. In consequence, the element of surprise upon which the success of the Canadians depended was lacking.
"4 miles east of Puys, Berneval. Here's what's left today of German fortifications behind that village. Number 3 Commando, mostly Britons, were to have sneaked inland and destroyed a big coastal gun battery. But the encounter with the German convoy had broken up the Commando flotilla. The assault seemed doomed.
6 of the 23 landing craft succeeded in making their landing. Now, 5 of these 6 parties immediately got involved in very heavy fighting and were all rounded up, killed or taken prisoner to a man. But the 6th party, 20 commandos, managed to scale a vertical cliff and to take on the battery on the top and to prevent them from firing the shipping by sniping at them.
On the other flank, 6 miles west of Dieppe, at Varangeville, Lord Lovett's number 4 Commando scored an almost classic victory.
I sent 50 men under my second in command to climb the cliff and take on the battery frontally, pinning the gunners by small arms fire, and I myself, with the main body, landed on a much easier beach, but considerably further to the west, nearly 1.5 miles from the battery, on the entrance to the river Sarn, which is a small meandering stream. It's deep, sluggish, and quicksands, as we found to our cost, on the banks. But there was no problem about cliff climbing, and I want to emphasize that point because the other party had to deal with a cliff which is over 100 foot high and caused a considerable problem.
You had to cover a lot of ground in a short time, though.
Well, we were trained men, and we landed in practically in running order. No heavy stuff at all with us. We were in gym shoes, light denim pants, and only carrying our rifles and explosive charges, hand grenades, and submachine guns. Then we got up the river bank, and there was no further trouble. We ran, as I say, or doubled, along the river for about half a mile, turned inland, and came in behind the battery according to plan. After that, it was only a question of tie-up, synchronized tie-up, for bringing an assault in from the rear, while the enemy were engaged from the front by the 5th portion of the commando, the 50 men that I landed under my second in command under the cliff itself. We laid our dead under the tower and ran up the Union Jack over them and carried out our wounded.
You lost something like 45 altogether of your commando.
That is what I remember. The numbers were approximately.
The German casualties probably were 200?
Somewhere around there. I think there were 112 actually in the battery, and we took 4 prisoners. I think the rest were put away.
The glory of Dieppe was that the Canadians did so well. There's no doubt that at Pourville particularly, the operation went off very much as planned. There was nothing to show that a veteran force could have done very much better. Colonel Merritt has told me a couple